we will see by the end of 2024, if not early 2025, US Treasuries yielding well over 10%. And what is that going to do to a highly leveraged financial system globally? It will be a crash, which will result in either 7 years of rolling recessions or depression, which will probably last about 7 years and will be accompanied by conflicts within different countries, if not civil wars, and wars between countries.
Welcome to Thoughtful Money. I'm its founder and your host, Adam Taggart. The last time today's guest expert was on this channel, he predicted a rocky road ahead for the global economy that will eventually culminate in the massive pile of trillions in global unserviceable debt going into default, causing a worldwide depression, not recession, depression by 2025. Since his last appearance, though, the markets have become a lot more optimistic. US GDP hit 4.9%, and inflation has been marching downwards all the way to 3%. Those are all positives. Though on the negative side, US deficits and debt balances have soared, leading economic indicators have fallen to recessionary levels, and the Middle East has been plunged into war. Today, we'll ask commodities expert and geopolitical analyst Simon Hunt how any of this impacts his dire forecast for 2024-2025. Simon, thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from Dubai.
Well, my pleasure to be here, particularly with Adam being independent.
Well, thank you so much. You've been a great supporter of that decision, and I very much appreciate, Simon, you being one of the early great guests that are appearing on this program. Thank you for coming and joining us. Again, like I said, I know it's late your time. Look, lots of questions, most of which are coming from a recent piece you wrote called The Global Chessboard. And at the end of this discussion, we'll tell people how they can sign up for your newsletters because they're excellent. So I definitely want to get into the geopolitical side of things with you. But if we can, let's start with a question I like to ask you at the beginning of all of these discussions. What's your current assessment of the global economy and financial markets?
Very simply, by April next year, America and certainly all of the G7 countries will be in recession. Employment is changing. Credit is getting tighter. Consumer loans are becoming problematic. And certainly if you look at Europe, it's pretty dire. And Japan is basically flatlining. I think a cushion's probably been put under the economy, but growth is going to be very muted. So all of that is happening at a time when political tensions are rising. Certainly in the Ukraine, but more in the Middle East with the situation over Gaza. And I think there is a common thread between what Russia has been imposed on it by NATO and what Israel sees. It is both survivability as a sovereign state. And that therefore means look for any quick solutions. So that's the short term. The next bit is that probably by April, the Fed is forced to change its tack and the other G7 central banks by dropping interest rates and putting their feet on the cradle. That then will lead to the dollar falling sharply, inflation resurging, magnified by both food and energy prices soaring. So that as we get into 2025, we will see global inflation probably over 13%, The market will hate it. And having seen in the second quarter a drop in long term in the 10-year treasuries, we will see by the end of 2024, if not early 2025, US treasuries yielding well over 10%. And what is that going to do to a highly leveraged financial system globally? It will be a crash, which will result in either 7 years of rolling recessions or depression, which will probably last about 7 years and will be accompanied by conflicts within different countries, if not civil wars, and wars between countries. And really, the bottom line is pretty simple. And that is that since at least 1991, and perhaps even at the end of World War II, America's primary objective has been to dismember Russia and thus gain control of Russia's huge natural resources. And secondly, the development of BRICS produces risks to the dollar's domination of the world and thus America's hegemonic status. So is America going to give up that powerful status, or is it prepared to go to war to retain that situation? And that is really where we stand today.
Okay, but other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how do you enjoy the play?
Depends on the play, doesn't it?
Oh, man. Well, Simon, you just hit us with a bunch of really heavy, really dire predictions here. Let me just make sure I got this right. G7 heading into recession by this April.
Correct.
This will force the central banks to pivot. That's going to bring the US dollar down. That's going to bring inflation up, especially food and energy, which is going to make the populace, really pinch the populace. You expect global inflation by 2025-ish to be around 13% globally, which is not what people want to hear after just having gone through the past 2 years. That is going to lead to a substantial downward correction in market prices. Call it a big market correction, market crash, one of the two. Along the way here, it sounds like when the central banks pivot, you expect things like US treasuries to go down in yield, meaning the prices will go up, but then that's going to be short-lived. And because of all the inflation, we're going to see yields start getting pushed back up by the bond vigilantes who want to be compensated for the loss of purchasing power. That brings us to an era of 10% plus yields on treasuries, meaning that other debt is yielding even higher. That incredibly painful cost of capital is going to plunge the global economy into, it's going to crash the global economy, yielding what you believe will be a 7-year period either of rolling recessions or just a general depression that we've got to grind through. During that period, obviously the populace is not going to be very happy. They're not going to feel like their leaders have done right by them with high inflation, crashed markets, very expensive essentials like food and energy, diminished economic prospects. So you expect to see civil strife and countries basically increasingly competing versus cooperating, maybe even going into war.
Correct. Just to add one thing, from the middle of next year, the middle of 2025, we will have what I call the last hurrah, which is that asset prices, equities, and commodities will soar. And in fact, from the trough that we see by April, they will virtually, off the commodity complex, the metals in particular, they will double in price. and the same for equities. So that's the
Okay.
last hurrah. That's the time to make money to survive the oncoming difficult periods.
Okay, so this, and I remember talking about this last time we chatted, this is your big sort of warning to investors, which is make it through, whatever correction is going to happen by April as we go into recession, as the central banks unleash the floodgates, right?
Correct.
That is when everything basically is going to shoot the moon. Bond prices are going to go up, equity prices are going to go up, metal prices are going to shoot the moon.
Correct.
And that's when you want to be positioned to ride that wave as best you can, and then basically invest
Liquidate.
liquidate, get into
Don't
cash,
be
get
the
into
last
tangible.
guy on the dance floor.
Don't be the last guy on the dance floor, you're saying. Yep.
Yeah.
And then you want to be in that position of safe liquidity as kind of the world goes to ruin for 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Look,
Is it all right?
Some people say I've had some doom and gloom people on this channel. Perhaps none have matched this yet. But Simon, I know you're not out there just trying to scare people. This is literally how you see things from your perch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
In which to remind people,
I've seen this coming for many years, and each time we push it out a little bit further. But I think we've really got to the end of how many plays the central banks can play. They're reaching the end of their tether.
Basically, we're running out of road for the can to be kicked by. This is when the reckoning finally happens. Okay, and I do want to remind viewers, Simon, that from your perch, you are a commodities expert. You've dealt with global commodities for the vast majority of your career. So the flow of commodities is pretty much like the circulatory system of the global economy, right? We need inputs to make things happen. And so you've got a very close finger on the pulse of the global economy. You're also located, as I mentioned, in Dubai. So you're not necessarily blinded by a purely Western point of view. You're sitting sort of at the crossroads of global commerce and can look at things a little bit more objectively, say, than an analyst who's fully ensconced in the West or fully ensconced in the East.
Well, yeah, let's put it into simple terms. The first sector that sees changes in economic activity are the copper rod mills and the copper alloy brass mills. They are the first step. So we started seeing a collapse in America and Europe and other parts of the world around May, June, say mid this year. And the feedback that I was then getting was business was falling by 20, 30, 40%, depending on who you talk. And yet the world seemed to be oblivious to what was happening in the real economy. And in China, in the first quarter, we saw a bit of a recovery. But since then, physical business has just turned south. And almost on many factories operating hand to mouth and accepting the few orders that come along, knowing they will lose money, but having to keep the factories open and the workers employed. Now what we're seeing is that people I talk to know we have not bottomed. We will probably bottom sometime in the next 6 months. As one said to me, you never know when you've bottomed until after the event.
Mm-hmm.
But physical business remains weak in Europe, remains weak in America. no recovery seen. And in fact, the fabricators talking about a last quarter of next year. So that fits my forecast that we actually will see recession in most countries by April next year.
Okay. And, we've talked in past interviews about a lot of the macroeconomic reasons why you see this global slowdown, big debt overhang, why you expect the 7 years of recession to follow the last hurrah. So I don't necessarily want to spend too much time on that this time around, but we'll get into it a little bit. I do want to try, if we can, to dive a bit more deeply right now on the geopolitical side of things, because that has changed a bit since we last talked, right? The Middle East has become, sadly, a hotspot again. I'm curious what implications you think the recent outbreak of hostilities there will have. But let me return to your recent post here about the global chessboard. You start this post with a bunch of really fascinating quotes from a lot of different geopolitical experts. I want to read one of them and then let you opine in any way you want to about the geopolitical situation. Here's the quote from Jake Sullivan, who's the U.S. National Security Advisor for the Foreign Affairs Committee, where U.S. National Security Advisor, this was quoted in Foreign Affairs just this month. He said, "Some of the seeds we're planting now, investments in advanced technology, for instance, or the AUKUS submarines, I hope I pronounced that correct, those will take many years to bear fruit. But there are also some issues on which we can and will act now, what we call our, quote, unfinished business. We must ensure a Ukraine that is sovereign, democratic, and free. We must strengthen peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. We must advance regional integration in the Middle East while continuing to check Iran." So it basically sounds like he's just laying out the priorities for U.S.'s foreign policy backed by its military. What do you take from all this?
Hey, goodness, that is a huge question. What he laid out there was completely the opposite of what transpired publicly from the meeting of the two presidents in San Francisco. It was obviously a tactical meeting. Both parties wanted to cool things for political reasons, but nothing changed strategically. I mean, you have had a very senior naval officer actually saying, and I quote, "These long-range missile projects in the Pacific are part of a strategy to create a missile wall in the first island chain spanning Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines to deter China." Go on, but nothing's changed. I think it's interesting that he said that we must, effectively saying, uphold Taiwan's independence. Now, she does not want to invade Taiwan, does not think that it's necessary to do so, because by around 2028, he feels that there will be enough compromises reached between whichever is the new government in Taiwan that they can come to a compromise, but only providing America does not cross China's red lines. Now, are we saying that Jake Sullivan is intimating that they will have those red lines might be crossed? I don't know. But that is a big risk. And certainly China's military planners. In fact, the government has been making contingency plans in case there is a war. I mean, I hear from our friends that the government is sequestering factories floor space from different private sector companies in order to produce widgets, components, etc., for the PLA. This factory owner was asked, "Is this just you?" And the answer was no. All the factories that I know in my region are experienced the same sort of thing. If that's the case, then it's probably wide scale across China, which is another reason why confidence and sentiment in China is so weak. They all talk to each other. So, next question.
Wow. Okay. So first off, just on Taiwan, as you said, it sounds like China's strategy here is let's let the political process inside Taiwan do our work for us. Let's
Correct.
get people that are more interested in creating some sort of détente with us, some sort of, maybe not a trajectory towards reunification. And I believe, and I'm no China expert, but I believe there was just a development in their elections very recently, like last couple of days, where some more China favorable politicians won some elections. I don't follow China very much, but I'm curious, is the momentum actually moving in the direction that China is hoping for at whatever pace inside Taiwan right now?
I think it's very debatable. I think it's 50-50 who wins the election. In fact, I'd probably say it's 55 for the existing government to be re-elected. But I think whichever government is elected, I think that they will find over the next 5 years or so enough compromises so that they can come together. It's very interesting that in the last government reshuffle, I've forgotten his name, the guy who in the leadership has been the brains and successive governments has been given the new task of finding a political solution for Taiwan. So
okay, which
everything is being put on the political side. That's what China wants it to remain so. And they just hope that America doesn't go and cross a red line.
Right.
So they are preparing for that.
Yeah. But it sounds like America is continuing to invest in this region in a way that
correct.
Could upend the apple cart, the political apple cart here.
Yeah.
Okay. And so anyways, part of the unfinished business, and again, I'm no geopolitical expert here, but is at a minimum showing China that America is militarily behind Taiwan, but also part of that unfinished business might be inciting something to circumvent the political process if America doesn't think it's going in the direction it wants it to go in.
Yeah.
Okay, which is a scary thought to contemplate.
It's an American political decision.
Okay. All right. So one of the other things that Jake Sullivan said here was ensure that Ukraine is sovereign, democratic, and free. How do we do that given the status of the current conflict there? Again, no geopolitical expert here, but it doesn't seem like Ukraine is winning, and by winning, I'll define kind of recapturing a lot of the territories that Russia has taken so far. So is there a way to have an outcome where Ukraine is sovereign, democratic, and free? Is this, I mean, could we get there with a negotiated settlement here where Ukraine just keeps the smaller amount of what it had before?
from what I piece together, there are a lot of parties through the back channels trying to engineer a peaceful end to the war. The problem is, as I said early on, what is at stake for Russia is its survivability as a sovereign state. If you have a free Ukraine, in effect, that's saying Ukraine in one form or another moves westwards, then when America has perfected its hypersonic technology, people say probably within a year, Russia does not want to see America, stroke NATO, locating hypersonic missiles close to Russia's borders. It comes back to the subject I keep emphasizing, survivability. So I think a negotiated settlement will only be on Russia's terms. They are in a position today to basically march through Ukraine.
Okay, so let's say this then. Let's say that there is a negotiated settlement, and the West promises whatever Russia wants right now in terms of commitments to not put weapons there, or Ukraine's not going to become part of NATO or whatever, right?
Can
You
I
said
interrupt?
earlier, yeah.
May I interrupt?
Sure.
Russia does not trust anything that Washington or the West says or puts down on paper.
Okay, so that's kind of where I'm going with my question here, which is whatever it takes to get a negotiated settlement, let's just assume for a second that happens. You said earlier that kind of the great game since World War II has been for the US to gain control of Russian resources. Did I hear that correctly?
Correct.
Okay.
By basically dismembering Russia so they get control.
Okay. So one can say, okay, that's part of the encroachment of NATO all the way up to Russia's doorstep here,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So what do you expect to happen after such a negotiating settlement is reached, if we assume one is reached? Is there a next great strategy here on the West side to somehow make a play for more of Russia's assets here?
I would say yes, particularly when they perfect hypersonic technology. Then Moscow has only a minute or two before a missile can hit the center of Moscow or wherever. That's why it's survivability, just as it's survivability for Israel.
Right, and I want to get to Israel in just a second. I'm just trying to think here, like the way you're describing it. We're putting myself in the Russian camp here for a second. If I feel that there's an existential threat, as you're saying there is, and I don't trust the other party, I just don't see any sort of way here in which there is a peaceful relation between the West and Russia going from here, because I don't know what the West could do to make Russia not be existentially fearful here. And I'm not trying to say Putin's a great man, and I'm not trying to get on the pro-Russia train here, but in the way in which you're framing all this, if Russia's worry is that, hey, we could be snuffed out in a minute's notice by people we don't trust, I just don't know how that gets resolved constructively.
I mean, I'm now speculating.
Yeah.
It's possible that BRICS forces, not United Nations, not American, not Europe, will be located in Ukraine to prevent Ukraine rearming itself, prevent NATO inching any further towards Russia's borders. I can only think something like that.
Wow. Okay. All right. And I didn't mean to rat hole on
I
this,
mean,
but one of the things my brain just goes to is I just don't know how this is
no,
resolvable
I don't
in a
either.
sustainably peaceful way. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on to
Which
the
comes
next.
back to what I said on. Sometime between 25 and the early 30s, I think some form of war is going to erupt.
Well, we're definitely seeing these pressure points continue to build, right? So we already
Yeah.
touched on Taiwan. We just touched on Ukraine and Russia. Now let's go to, kind of the eternal pressure point or fault line, which is, Israel and its relations with its neighbors there in the Middle East. How, of the conflicts that we've dialed through, how material is this one versus the others? Is it just as important? Is it more regional and therefore a little less, going to create less shockwaves than the others? What do you think?
It risks having a much bigger shockwave. And I think that China, Russia have been acting as restraining forces. What's at stake is really as follows, in my view. What October 7th did to them, to the psyche of Israel, is that we cannot live peacefully whilst there is a Palestine state and whilst there is the continuing threat from Hezbollah. Then if you look at a hidden agenda, not so hidden if I know about it, from America, which has been to create a second front war with Russia. How come? I listen quite regularly to Israeli news channel 124. And there are frequent guys being interviewed, ex-intelligence services, ex-IDF, sometimes active ones. And there is always, it comes back to the central pivot, which is it's Iran causing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if Iran causes everything, it's Hezbollah and it's Hamas. So there is very definitely a feeling that we have to, first of all, eradicate Hezbollah. The problem is Hezbollah is not just located in Lebanon, but in Syria too. So if you start really attacking Syria, they've already basically knocked out Damascus's 2 airports. Then who is brought into the war? Russia, through the strategic alliance. So what does that then mean? The implication is that if Russia is brought in, then Iran comes in through its own forces to support Russia and China too. Now, the generally accepted view is that Iran is really an easy target, but it's not. According to the experts I listen to, Iran some years ago switched from developing nuclear weaponry to developing advanced cruise missiles and hypersonic missiles, all of which they have now. in addition to which acquired anti-ship missiles from both Russia and China. So any hit on Iran would be met with pretty devastating consequences, one of which would be the closure of the Hormuz Straits, through which at least 20% of the world's oil flows. That itself would create pandemonium in financial markets, since it would probably blow up the trillions of derivative positions. So what is the likely outcome? I think the forces try to calm the waters in the area will succeed this year in preventing an accident happening and a big explosion in the area. I think also what has probably come out, particularly of the summit meeting in Riyadh last weekend, and the current meeting of Muslim countries organized by China and BRICS, is that there is only one solution, and that is a two-state solution. The problem with that Israel will never accept it, particularly after October 7th. So where do we go from here? The risks are so big that at some point, and I don't think it'll be this year, but some point in 2025, all hell is going to let loose. How big? Who knows? Look at the forces that America has put in place. An aircraft carrier fleet, together with America's most sophisticated command and control ship off the coast of Israel. The SS Eisenhower aircraft fleet, now in the Oman Sea. They're supposed to be there as a deterrent. But to the other side, they can be viewed as offensive weapons and weaponry. So I'm not trying to present a very dire outcome, but the risks are just massive. And I'm not sure that America has the diplomatic skills to use diplomacy to create sense in a very complex and difficult situation. Because essentially what you are now building up is a world of Muslims, including Turkey, including China, including Russia, who have significant Muslim populations, versus the West.
Okay, so it sounds like
at some stage there's going to be an accident that's going to trigger things. That's the big risk.
So to your parade of horribles that you walked us through at the beginning of this discussion, it sounds like, we may need to add World War III to that list. And
well, a lot of people, that's what a lot of people are talking about. All I'm saying is I don't think we're there yet, but there's a big, big risk that by 2030, in some form, and I suspect that all parties will agree, don't use nuclear weaponry. They don't have to, because they got hypersonic technology. And probably by then America's got it.
All right, so it sounds like
so it's not the world is not going to be obliterated by nuclear weaponry.
All right. Well, hopefully that's the case, though there are other technologies that can do a lot of damage, like the ones you're referencing. So it sounds like you see the Middle East as sort of like this coal seam fire right now, right? Where, it appears we put it out, but it's just raging beneath the surface still. And then it just, crops up again. And the danger is that one of the times it crops up, it could really ignite something that we can't control. All right. Well, on that, just because we're beginning to run out of time, I want to move to your currency outlook. So you talked about how you see by middle of next year, as the central banks pivot, that we're going to see. Well, you specifically mentioned the dollar going down. Now, this will be interesting because I think probably everybody will be in pivot mode at that point in time. So it's going to be sort of a race to the bottom, probably amongst folks. But certainly the purchasing power of the US dollar, I can imagine, would be going down, given the type of central bank response that you expect. First off, I guess, do you expect this race to the bottom, like I just mentioned? Will everybody be trying to stimulate their economies by just turning the printers on and having them go burr?
Certainly everybody within G7 countries. I think the opposite about China. I think China has been basing their financial strategy on the basis that the Western world is going to go into a mega economic and financial crisis, which is why they have not overstimulated their economy during the current weakness. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they will either. It's very targeted stimulus, not like it has been historically. So what does that mean for currencies? It means, first of all, people will the dollar. So you'll get sterling, you'll get the euro and the yen. Pretending that they're strong currencies, but it's only because money is flooding out of America into other currencies, and where can they go? But eventually, when you get into the difficult period beyond 2025, then those currencies too will collapse. I think that what the policy of BRICS, obviously, is de-dollarization. How are they going to achieve that? The first step is much greater use of local currencies. You've seen it in the big trade deal between UAE and India, all done in their own currencies.
And sorry to interrupt, but we're going to ask you about kind of the BRICS, competing currency in just a minute. But what you're talking about is not a competing currency that's going to challenge the dollar here for, global.
Yeah, I'm just coming on to that.
Yeah, world reserve currency status. What you're talking about here is just individual trade deals between countries just agreeing to settle in something other than dollars.
Correct. That's the first step.
Yeah.
The second step is the BRICS, through the new development bank, perfecting a BRICS currency. Whatever it might be called, some people say RRR, but who knows? What will be the substance of that currency? My guess is that the BRICS currency will be backed by the bonds of the big BRICS countries, such as Russia and China. Those currencies, in turn, will be announced as being backed by gold. not convertible, but backed. Take China. China's gold reserves are north of 50,000 tons, half of which is owned by households and financial institutions, bought from the Shanghai Gold Exchange since inception. I think it was in 2005. So they own approximately 25,000 tons. And just recently was an arrangement made whereby households can buy gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange on the equivalent of a monthly stop order. So China turn around and the rest of the gold, 25,000 tons plus, is owned by different ministries, particularly the PLA. So one day China will turn around and say, our currency is backed by gold. Look how much the households own. And we've also got in the different ministries X, Y, and Z. Russia has north of 12,000 tons. Where is that held? It's held in the company, and I forget the name, which sits above the central bank. So you have two currencies backed by gold, whose bonds will then support the BRICS currency. So in effect, BRICS will move away from fiat currency status into a currency directly or indirectly backed by gold.
Okay. And what do you, we've talked a bit about this, so I'm curious about this question. What do you think the West's response to that will be? Will it be a return to hard backing of major Western fiat currencies, or will they try something else?
I think it comes back to my original statement. War.
So basically, the empire will strike back. The
empire will strike back with the only tools it's got left, like all empires. Except I have to say the British Empire, we negotiated our way out, but all prior empires, it was war.
It was war. And so the war here, the purpose of the war would basically be to thwart the emergence of these competitors and say, you must continue to use our fiat solution.
Yeah.
Okay. Which, to your point, history says is usually the way that it goes. Now, history also shows that world reserve currencies have a limited lifetime. Lots of arguments whether this is the twilight of the US dollar. I'll let smarter people than I debate that. But you're basically saying it won't be given, the world currency dominant status will not be given up without a fight.
Yeah, because if America gives it up, the whole hegemonic status is in tatters. They become just another great.
Okay. But let me ask you this. So I remember the last time we talked was in the spring, and there was that August meeting coming up of the BRICS countries, and there was a lot of speculation that a competing BRICS currency was going to be announced at that meeting. One wasn't. Was that a surprise to you?
No. No. I mean, the Russian guy who was doing most of the organizational work actually spoke at the Valde Club meeting before the BRICS meeting and essentially gave the game away. It won't be announced in Johannesburg. There's a lot of work still to be done. And that's where we are now.
Okay. Last question on this, and then I just want to end on a practical, what should regular investors be considering right now. One of the criticisms, I guess I'd say I've heard of this BRICS coalition is, you look at the Western Alliance, and those are alliances that have been in existence for a long time, centuries. You look at the BRICS coalition, and there's a lot of countries there that have had rocky relationships, to put it mildly, for many of the past couple centuries. What's your sense of the success of the cohesion of this coalition?
That's a very good question. Particularly, there's divisions in views between India and China. I think these divisions will be sorted out over time. I think there's a great feeling that we need to come together. We're tired of being bullied by America and told what to do by NATO and the Europeans. They've rejected all the peace offerings we've offered. So we have to create, it's our objective to create a national world to replace the world that's being dominated by America. And you are putting together, as you rightly say, nations that, if not having enmity relationships, have difficult relationships. But I think that the common cause is greater, or will be greater, than the disunity between countries. I suspect, without knowing, the divisions between China and India, really India saying, we want an apology from you, China, for what you've been doing on our northern frontier. It's not yet been given, but I think at the right moment it will be given. And then they can sit down and have sensible discussions. Don't forget, India is also a member of SCO. So I think these are issues that time will resolve them.
Okay. As they say, politics makes strange bedfellows. Maybe geopolitics makes even stranger bedfellows.
Well put.
When you all have an enemy that's you're angry enough at to resolve your own international differences. Okay. Well, look, in wrapping this up, and thank you for giving us so much of your time, Simon. The people who watch this channel are just regular investors. They are looking to not become victims of some of these big trends that you were talking about. Ideally, they'd love to grow their wealth, not just protect it. I think you've laid out an arc here that probably is going to influence a lot of people to want to put their heads in the oven and say it's useless. Hopefully that's not the case.
Well, come on, there's opportunities.
Well, that's what I want to get to here, right? So you've certainly said, hey, look, there's going to be a moment, perhaps middle of next year, where you're going to want to be along everything, because that's going to be your last best opportunity to make a lot of money. So just what are the kind of steps that they should be considering here? Is it literally a feeding frenzy where they can just be along anything, or are there particular asset classes you think will perform particularly well? I think you mentioned you think the precious metals are going to double, if I heard you correctly. But what would you recommend somebody consider here?
I don't think I don't in our time frame we don't have gold doubling, but we probably have gold going to between 2,500 to 3,000 by the end of 2025.
Okay, so 50% increase over the
next. But it's basically long base metals, long oil, long equities.
Okay, so I'm sorry, it was long oil, equities, and what was the other one?
Base metals.
Base metals, okay. and base metals, just because of the reaction to the decrease in the dollar, or base metals because this stimulus is going to spark
Well,
an
basically
economic
what
surge?
happens is that manufacturing, instead of buying one widget, will buy two or three widgets as their hedge against a falling dollar and rising prices.
There you go. Okay, that makes sense.
Then the second part is the financial institutions, the funds, who historically, in such an environment, want physical things, physical metals, as well as futures. I mean, to tell a story back in the large inflation era of the 1975 to 1981, during that period, I had a large chemical company, American chemical company, as a client, who told me after the event that they had actually bought 200,000 tons of physical copper, probably the equivalent of 500,000 today,
Oh my goodness.
as their.
Where do you even put that?
In a warehouse.
A big one, apparently. Okay. So one thing I didn't hear you mention here was bonds. And one would think that bonds would perform well in this period where the central banks are trying to shove down interest rates, in the short term. What are your thoughts on bonds?
Well, I think you'll have, we've got US Treasuries yielding in the first quarter of next year at 5.7%. But then it collapses when the Fed and other central banks put their feet on the credit pedal to 3% in the second quarter. And as recovery comes in and inflation starts taking off, then bond yields will be rising. This is all using 10-year treasuries, US treasuries.
Yeah.
That's our benchmark. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to give you an arc and you can correct it in any way. But it sounds like what you're saying is stay on the short end of the curve until April-ish, then perhaps think about going long on the duration curve to ride the near-term decrease in interest rates.
Sure.
But
sure.
get out of that once the 10 years down by around 3, and then probably go short bonds.
Yeah.
Okay, got that. And back to base metals and oil. Do you have an opinion as to where you think the opportunity lies? Is it owning the commodity itself, or is it owning those producers that tend to act as a levered play?
My own view is it's better to own the physical rather than the shares of companies.
Okay, and
which
why?
Which will also benefit.
Yeah.
But I think you're moving into a world in half of next year where you want physical things and not paper things.
Okay.
Despite the fact that paper will rise.
Paper will rise, but it'll be a volatile and uncertain world. And in that type of environment, people want things they know.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think by the time we get into the second half of this decade, we'll be moving to the barter world.
Okay, the barter world. Okay,
yeah,
so
some of my friends are doing it.
And what are they using?
They build up a stock of things that they think people will want.
Okay, I mean, so they're not necessarily bartering yet, but they're buying what they think will be the barter currency.
Yeah, whether it's a solar panel or it's a generator or it's a bar of gold or a bar of silver or a bar of copper.
Or alcohol. I know that some people are, investing in casks.
Why not? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You go into a depression time, what do people turn to?
Okay, so just in wrapping up here, going back to barter, that's something that's going to make that oven sound really tempting to somebody. But when we talk about opportunity here, yes, there's the short-term opportunity, perhaps middle of next year, to ride this stimulus surge.
Yeah.
You then said
Yeah.
get liquid, and presumably there will be a time where folks who have followed that recipe can then deploy their liquidity at, I'm going to use the term blood in the streets from the old Rothschild saying, but where they'll be able to buy great assets at great values. Are they going to have to wait 7 years for that moment, or will there be opportunities sooner, do you think?
Where are we, 23? No, you'll probably be waiting, oh God, 3 to 5 years.
Okay. So be prepared to park in your liquidity and just in safety for a couple of years, but then be poised to start deploying it when the conditions look favorable. And as long as world communications still work in your future, Simon, we'll have you back on this program again and again to give people, real-time updates as to how you're seeing things.
Super.
All right.
Anybody wants to contact me, it's
that's where I'm going next.
simon-hunt.com.
Yeah, sorry, I just talked over you there, but yes, for folks that have really enjoyed this discussion and would like to follow you and your work, where should they go?
simon-hunt.com.
Okay, great. And Simon, when I edit this, I will put up the URL to that clearly on the screen. I'll also put it in the description, folks, so there'll be a one-click link to that website. Simon, it's been fantastic. Thank you for sharing so much of your time with us. Folks, to thank Simon for doing such and for encouraging him to come back on the program when he's got a material update to his outlook, please vote your support for that by hitting the like button and then clicking on the red subscribe button below, as well as that little bell icon. And just a reminder, folks, since we're still a new channel, the subscriber count really does matter. So if you are watching this and have not yet subscribed, it's totally free. It takes you a second to do so. Please do click that subscribe button because it helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, where the more people who do that, the more widely it'll distribute this content. I just want to remind folks too that I'm sharing lots of updates on the new Thoughtful Money venture on my personal Substack, but also on that Substack for the people who have been kindly supporting this effort by signing up for a premium subscription to it. It's free to all to just sign up in general, but if you want to subscribe to the premium part, I have restarted the Adams Notes, which are my summaries of these long videos, long interviews with great minds like Simon, so that if you don't want to furiously take notes and just be able to listen during the interview, you can read my recaps afterwards, and my recap from Simon's will be posted to that premium Substack as well. So to go sign up for the Substack, free or premium, just go to adamtaggart.substack.com. And I just want to remind folks too that a lot of what Simon talked about today was echoed in my recent interview with Ted Oakley. And if you haven't watched that yet, that would be a great one to watch after this. I'll put up a link to it right here. Simon, thank you very much, my friend. Always wonderful to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Total pleasure. Everyone else, thanks so much for watching.